Welcome back, students. This is video 2 in week 6 for development economics, where we are focusing on economic growth and the reduction in poverty and inequality. Next up, we are going to see what Gary Fields has to say about inequality and poverty, and specifically how it relates to economic growth. Apologies for the white noise in the background. I'm not sure what's going on with my microphone, but those of you who have already done your presentation, you can relate to me when I say that recording your slides using Screenomatic is not as easy as it seems. Anyways, back to development economics. Is there a poverty-inequality trade-off? So, in growing or developing economies, we know that both inequality and poverty exists, and economic growth almost always reduces poverty, but its impact on inequality varies. So should governments in developing economies, should they aim to maximize economic growth rates, even if inequality increases in the process, so that poverty can be reduced? So the question is really, how much should we care about the changing income distribution in the course of economic growth? This is according to Fields. And it becomes very practical when you consider questions like that zero rating in South Africa for certain goods. And we can look at the experiences of different middle income countries, and you can see that they will differ in this regard. So, according to Gary Fields, he argues that poverty reduction should be the main priority. He believes that inequality and poverty are not of equal importance. And in his own words, he says, "I do not see a compelling economic case for reducing inequality per se. I do see a compelling ethical reason to lower poverty. My preference is to regard inequality instrumentally. It is all right for inequality to rise if the increase in inequality causes poverty to fall. I know that is a personal value judgment." And again, when it comes to these issues of poverty and inequality, there are many opinions and judgment statements on it. This is falling under what we call normative economics. So everyone will have a different perspective on it, but this is his one. There are two other things that you need to consider apart from personal value judgment and ethics, but you know from previous lectures that the concept of inequality, it can be subjective, it is subjective, and there are different measures for inequality, and the value standard of those measures could be dubious. So this is just a little exercise that you can go through on your own time, because it basically highlights the normative nature of inequality, that it's a subjective process, and your answer to this question on inequality will depend on which measure you actually use, and we did a lot of that last week. You can read through all of these inequality measures. We have covered the Lorenz curve and Gini coefficients, and we've looked at a few other measures for inequality. But as far as Gary Fields is concerned, poverty is more important than inequality. In increasing order of importance, you will have a standard measure of inequality, the ratio of high incomes to low incomes, inequality between salient groups, inequality of opportunity, and then poverty. Okay, so poverty is what he believes is the most important issue to deal with, and last on his list is the standard measures of inequality. So he really doesn't care about your Gini coefficients and Lorenz curves, etc. So elements of a proposed anti-poverty program, it would have to include earnings opportunity, because we know that a lot of what drives poverty is linked to the labor market, a lack of access to employment or a lack of access to decent wages. Investment in workers' productive skills and ability. This is basically your investment in human capital, which would be education and health. Social protection for the very poor and vulnerable, those who would not be able to fend for themselves in the labor market for whatever reason. And then improved opportunities for the lower income classes as well. Next up, we look at inequality and growth, specifically the impact of inequality on growth. So when you read your other prescribed work, you will see that there could possibly be a flaw in Gary Field's argument, and that may lie in the fact that income inequality and poverty alleviation may be linked. And the mechanism through which they are linked is that inequality possibly affects the rate of economic growth, which in turn would affect the rate of poverty reduction. So we can consider two possibilities. Either income inequality helps or boosts economic growth, or income inequality hinders or hurts economic growth. So when you consider traditional views, inequality would be seen as a booster for economic growth, since growth requires savings and rich people have a higher propensity to save. Hence, inequality is necessary for economic growth. But the modern view is very different. It sees inequality, income inequality, as hurtful to economic growth. Where we have excessive income inequality, economic growth will be hampered through two channels. Firstly, through imperfections in your credit market, and secondly, through distortions in policy interventions. So looking at the first channel of credit markets, where we have credit market imperfections, there will undoubtedly be information asymmetries. So the poor cannot undertake productive investments and investments in human capital or entrepreneurial activities. And based on that, more unequal economies should have more poor credit constrained people, which basically stifles your capital bases and lowers your economic growth, which in turn has a negative impact on poverty, i.e. more poverty. If we look at the second channel, which focuses on distortions of policies, politics tends to play an important role in highly unequal societies. Either the poor abuse their political clout, so the median voter might support higher capital taxes, with weaker incentives therefore being realized for productive investments, which would lower economic growth and therefore have a negative impact on poverty. Or the rich can abuse their economic clout, where asset ownership gives rise to great lobbying power, and they might not invest in good policies, so you'll have poor policies with protection of declining industries, which together also lead to lower economic growth, which has a negative impact on poverty. So those are the two channels through which inequality negatively impacts on economic growth and therefore on poverty. And so there have been many development economists that have tried to look at these transmission mechanisms that relate inequality to growth and poverty. And basically it is now widely accepted, or a stylized fact, that inequality hampers growth. So inequality is not good for economic growth, especially in instances where the initial degree of inequality is high in a particular country. So let's have a mini summary of what all of this means for poverty reduction. Well, it's well established in our previous slides that the link between economic growth and poverty is that it goes in opposite directions. So as the economy grows, poverty will fall. This has been proven over and over again. So if we now add to that another stylized fact, and that is that excessive income inequality limits economic growth, then relying on the first fact that economic growth is good for reduction in poverty, if we then have excessive inequality which limits economic growth, it goes without saying that it will also hamper or damper the rate at which poverty falls. So this implies that any country that is serious about reducing poverty or alleviating poverty, while the focus should remain on poverty alleviation interventions, it also needs to be complemented by redistributive measures, okay? Because when you boost growth, when your income is more equally distributed, you will also reduce poverty more rapidly. But at the same time, attempts to do too much too quickly should also be avoided. So macroeconomic populism, as we've seen in some other countries, where maybe the focus swung too much towards dealing with income inequality as opposed to poverty, it doesn't bring about the desired effect. In our next video clip, we are going to focus on inequality and poverty. We will take a look at what Revillian has said about that, and how these two concepts relate to economic growth.